The Department of Public Enterprises has published the National State Enterprises Bill. Now, the department says this is meant to address some of the critical governance issues in the SOEs. There will be, of course, a State Asset Management SOC. Let's speak to Sandile Swana, who's a political and governance analyst. Mr. Swana, thank you so much for your time this evening. Is this the big shakeup, or as some have called it, a dramatic shakeup as far as governance is concerned in some of the SOEs?
Thank you so much, Bongiwe, and your viewers. Not necessarily a dramatic shake-up of any kind, because when you read the documentation, the draft bill rests on the PFMA Public Finance Management Act, and it also rests on the existing Companies Act, which will govern how this company is run. But every other state-owned companies, that's how they've run their businesses. And those businesses, including Eskom, Transnet, and so on, have fallen on evil days. So that is not a dramatic shake-up. Secondly, they are now saying that they want to remove the businesses from their line departments. In other words, you won't have transport running any transport companies, you won't have minerals and energy running any mining and energy companies, and so on and so forth, as if that was ever the problem. The problem which they admit, was they recommend a different solution, has been that they've appointed wrong people through the cadre deployment process to run the companies that some of them were generally successful before now.
Now, one would then ask, I mean, when it comes to removing some of these from the line function, first of all, even before you go to some of these appointments, is there even capacity to implement should things get to a practical level?
Yes, Bongiwe, I was asking myself that actually I would have loved to be given two documents. The one document being the business case. Why are we doing this? What is the measurable cost of doing this? How many jobs are going to be actually lost in doing this, and so on, and having different categories: economic analysis, financial analysis, technical analysis, technology analysis, etc. Then this law, if you read these 23 pages of this proposed bill, you learn nothing about the possible dire consequences that could come from implementing this bill, a wrong cure for a wrong disease. So it's a problem. We don't know what these guys are actually trying to do, because the detailed business case is not in front of us. How much money do they need to raise to do this? All of those things are not documented, have not yet been presented to us. And it's possible to do that.
Yeah, and especially because, you know, that there's also, when you read it, it talks about how some of these particular line items will include helping the companies raise capital from the markets, minimize political interference, and separate state regulatory functions from its ownership functions. And you and I, even this evening, listening to something you've alluded to, are talking and expressing a concern even about some of the appointments then, because they say they want to deal with this issue of political interference. Is this something that can be dealt with even through this particular document? Because when you think about it, I'm reading, but I'm seeing very little about how do you deal with political interference.
Yes, I think we need to be very honest about this so-called political interference story. South Africa has had a very successful track record of running public institutions. You will remember that places, institutions, state-owned institutions, if you want to call them that, such as UCT, WITS, have been owned and operated by the state for a very long time, and their rankings internationally have been improving. Virtually all of our engineers and all of our doctors are produced by these state-owned institutions. However, more especially in the so-called former black universities, such as Fort Hare, VUT down the road here, you then find that comrades have been able to start penetrating the supply chain systems at UNISA and so on, and actually start corruption. And otherwise, the category, which is university, a category that we're world-class in, and we're still world-class. But once the comrades step in there, the thing starts to rot immediately.
So then what becomes the best way forward here? Because in the absence of this business case, as members of the public are now looking at it potentially and looking at what's going on, reading the statement from the Democratic Alliance, for example, they say the centralization for them is simply not working. It's going to perpetuate more of the same, while others are saying that give it a chance, it might be exactly what is needed. But there's still some concern, even from the business, fraternity all on its own, that there may be other things that they're looking for here. So how do they begin to chart a way forward to sell this to people like you and I and the rest of South Africans?
I think the bill needs to be put aside and the business case be put on the table. Because once we look at the manpower, you asked the question about the skills. By the way, we are one of the countries that is so blessed with skills. Some of the South Africans have got extraordinary engineering expertise, extraordinary management capabilities, and solid local and international experience. So we need to make sure that every resource that we have has been taken into account, and every other resource that we need, more especially the incompetent ANC comrades that have been put there, need to be removed. So those issues need to be cleared up ahead of time before we start saying we're changing the ownership of these companies. These companies built this country. South Africa is the most industrialized nation on the African continent because of these companies that are being privatized today. Companies that carried us from our youth, even from the day we were born, most of us, until now, until the comrades started bankrupting these companies. So let's start with the business case, and we want a detailed business case with all the numbers in there and know exactly what is it that we're going to gain out of this.
And it'll be, quite important to know what the country gains, especially when it comes to some of the monies that were laid bare in the Zondo Commission's report and the Commission, as we heard just how much was being wasted and what we have lost when it comes to corruption. But thank you so much for that. And let's see if we do get the business case then. And if it is put in front of us and we're able to scrutinize it and see what's contained. That is Sandile Swana, political and governance analyst.